Question. Were the assembly places ever hit from the air? Answer. None of them were hit until the attacks to which I have referenced in the last months of the war. Question. What were your main shortages in the building of individual sections? Answer. There were some shortages of electrical equipment, particularly after some of your heavy bombing attacks. Then, the man in another city who produced diesel engines would be very happy that he had tool machines on hand. In the next attack, he would probably be hit. Sometimes the steel production could not keep up, but the whole production question was under Minister Speer. Question. At what time did you transfer responsibility for submarine construction to Speer? Answer. In the summer of 1943. As we finished the construction drawings, we turned them over to Speer. Question. Do you think that Speer increased production efficiency? Answer. I would put it this way. The Navy could have done it by itself, if the industry had not suffered from air raids, and if there had been sufficient raw materials. Under the war conditions, there had to be a central office which equalized losses and helped related industries. Question. Was the production of submarines by sections Speer's idea? Answer. Yes. That is, it was originated by your Mr. Kaiser in the construction of other vessels, and so was not a new idea, but Speer applied it to submarines. Question. Was the new submarine invulnerable against air attacks? Answer. Yes, it was. Invulnerable. Question. Can you tell us how many of the new submarines you figured you would have been able to build if it had not been for the air attacks? Answer. That can be illustrated by the fact that we had only 5 of the small ones and 1 of the large ones at sea at the time of the capitulation, that was in May 1945. We had planned to have that many at sea by November 1944. Question. How many had you planned to have at sea by May 1945? Answer. About 30 to 40 of the large ones and 40 of the small ones. Question. Is it true that, as Merker has stated in an interview, the first of the new type submarines was delivered in May 1944? Answer. No, that does not check. Question. Is it true, as Merker also said, that 345 of the new types had been built by the end of the war, of which probably less than 10 were put into operation? Answer. The number of 345 probably includes the old types. The figures of 10 he mentions is probably about right. Just how he reaches that figure of 345 I cannot tell. Of course, it took about 6 months from the time the large types were produced until they could be put out to sea. Question. What was the period for the small ones? Answer. 2 to 3 months. Question. Speer said that these submarines, the new type, were put into production without any actual testing. Is that true? Answer. It is true that after we had made the drawings, we immediately started production, and then we sent them right out to sea. They had, of course, to stay 2 months in the docks for different things, and 4 months for training. Incidentally, through the bombing attacks, the docks were sometimes overcrowded. Question. How many tons of Allied and neutral shipping do you estimate were sunk by your submarines throughout the war? Answer. The claims of the submarine commanders were very closely checked, and afterwards from the results of 20% were cut off. I believed that altogether about 18 million gross registered tons were claimed by submarine commanders, of which we figured 13 to 14 million were correct. I believe that all documentation pertaining to this were handed over to your people in Flensburg by the 2nd Department. Question. You have said that about 600 submarines were lost. What were the reasons for these losses, and how many did you lose through air attack? Answer. The main share was through air attacks. What the ratio is, I cannot tell you exactly because, obviously, we had not heard from the lost submarines. But on the basis of our experience, I know that the main part were sunk from the air. Question. Did the OKM have any figures on that? Answer. No, we did not attempt to estimate it. Some individual officers have tried to estimate it, but there was no reliable stats for such an estimate. Question. Were most of the losses at sea or in the ports? Answer. At sea. In 1943 and throughout most of 1944, they were much greater at sea than in the port. Towards the end of 1944 and beginning of 1945, losses at sea and in port were about even. Question: did you suffer some losses in the French ports towards the end of 1942? Answer: not a single submarine was lost there throughout the war, because we had sub-pens. Question: were any U-boats damaged in the submarine pens? Answer: only one submarine was damaged in a French port because all the repairs were carried out in the sub-pens. Question: besides actually sinking submarines at sea, did our anti-submarine air operations have any other effects in preventing submarines from sinking Allied ships? Answer: yes, very much so. When one of your convoys would approach in a certain direction, all submarines had to try to reach it rapidly, moving on the surface. But due to the Air Force, they had to dive very often, which slowed them down so that very often they would arrive too late. The decisive thing in the submarine warfare was the Air Force. Question: what were the other important factors in order of their effectiveness? Answer: the depth charge. But compared to the Air Force, it was all minor. Question: did you have any reports about the effectiveness of the 50mm aircraft cannon? Answer: the effect is very great on submarines, which is only sheet metal. Also against any personnel who may be standing around on deck. Question: what countermeasures did you take against these attacks? Answer: we had as much flak as possible to defend ourselves. Question: was not the most effective countermeasure to crash dive? Answer: not always. That was very difficult. A submarine is most vulnerable and without defense if caught by an aircraft while submerging. Question: who was charged with the building of the sub-pens? Answer: that was Todt. Question: how long did it take for a submarine to turn around in the sub-pen? Answer: only 2 days if there were no repairs. They were actually on the average 5 to 6 weeks in port. Question: did the bombing increase the time or turnaround? Answer: not the bombing of sub-pens. That did not hurt us at all. The bombing at sea did, of course, increase the time or turnaround, due largely to the necessity for repairing sheet metal that was damaged by pressure of explosions. Question: did the bombings of the sub-pens in no way influence the time required for the necessary repairs? Answer: no. The repair shops themselves were inside the pens. Question: what about the damage to installations outside the pens? Answer: everything was on the inside. Question: did the sub-pens give complete protection while the U-boat was in harbor? Answer: yes, at least until the very last attacks, when 6-ton bombs were used. These would penetrate, but cause very little damage below. Question: do you know how much material and labor was needed for the construction of those sub-pens? Answer: I have no idea. Question: how many submarine refueling tankers did you have as a maximum? Answer: some 3 surface vessels. I think that was the highest. Most of the time, 2 only, and the same number of the submarine tankers, that is, simultaneously in the zone of operation. But the whole thing stopped when your Air Force began to operate over the entire Atlantic area in 1943. From then on, the refueling at sea was impractical. Section 3. Reasons for non-existence of German Naval Air Force. Question: did you ever demand long-range aircraft in order to supplement the submarine blockade? Answer: yes. I asked for long-range aircraft from the very beginning in order to locate your ships, and for that purpose, I established liaison in 1941 with a Luftwaffe group, which was stationed in Bordeaux. Question: do you think that the blockade of England would have been more effective if you had long-range airplanes? Answer: much more so. There were only some 10 to 20 submarines in the Atlantic in 1941, and the area which they could patrol was negligible. Question: why was not production of such aircraft started? Answer: the production program of the Luftwaffe was so heavily towards the types needed for land warfare that no capacity was left over for that. Question: why did you not slightly modify the bombers used against England so that they would have a longer range? Answer: the Navy always advocated that, but I can only say that the number of these long-range airplanes was very small. Question: who made the decision not to build these long-range aircraft? Answer: the Air Force. Grand Admiral Raeder was of the opinion that the Navy should have its own Air Force, and Goering was of the opinion that he would have to control all the air forces. If the Navy had had control, it would have built long-range airplanes. Question: was this issue presented to Keitel or Hitler himself? Answer: Grand Admiral Raeder asked the Führer for a decision on the question of the Navy's own air arm, but the Führer decided in favor of the Luftwaffe. Question: if you had finished your aircraft carriers, would these airplanes have been under the jurisdiction of the Luftwaffe? Answer: this is another matter on which the doctors disagreed. I believe that the navigation of the ship and its strategic employment would have been under the Navy, but the rest of the work under the Air Force. But we never had any carriers anyways. Question: at what time did most of the discussion about long-range bombers take place? Answer: both before and during the war. I always clamored for them, and Grand Admiral Raeder also tried to push it through. The final decision of the Führer not to give the Navy its own Air Force came in 1940. Section 4. Other Axis Naval Forces. Answer: I cannot tell you that exactly. At the end, we only had the Prinz Eugen and the Nürnberg. All other ships were either bombed out or lost. We had some destroyers left, probably about 13 that were intact. Rear Admiral Wagner will be able to give you the exact figures, but I'm sure that the exact figures have already been given to your commission in Flensburg. Question: when did you plan the invasion of England? Answer: in 1940. The invasion was prepared with boats and river vessels which we found in the French rivers and canals. Question: did the Navy favor the invasion? Answer: the Navy considered it militarily impossible because we had not made any preparations on sea. Question: what studies did you make about the possibilities of using the French fleet? Answer: the French ships which fell into our hands in northern France were very small and very few. After all, the whole French fleet went to the Mediterranean. Question: was the loss of the fleet considered serious? Answer: I was a submarine commander at the time and not versed in the political question. I am in no position to answer that question. Question: would you have used the French fleet if it had been available to you? Answer: I do not think so. We had captured one English submarine and we tried to use it, but we had to give up because it required special crews and spare parts that were not available to us. Question: what was the condition of the Italian fleet? Answer: the Italian fleet was a great disappointment. We had believed that their know-how was better than it proved to be. The difficulty was in their tactical training. I can remember an action in which 4 Italian cruisers engaged 2 English cruisers. In such a fight, the Italians should have been obliged to win, but it came out the other way, because the Italian admiral did not know what to do with his ships or how to concentrate their firepower. The whole attitude of the Italians can be demonstrated by what happened with the Italian submarines during one of the visits of the Führer to the Deuce. That was before the war. There was a big naval review in which 100 submarines dived simultaneously, and simultaneously surfaced, and simultaneously fired one round. It looked rather effective, and when the Führer came back, he asked Admiral Raeder to ask me if the German submarines were able to do that too. Whereupon I replied, yes, all I need for that is a synchronized watch in every submarine, but I have no time to play with such things.